what you need to know about donor-advised funds, especially those in the private wealth sector. Hi, I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz. This is the first day from the Fundraising School, and I'm joined today by Elaine Martin. She is Senior Vice President of Fidelity Charitable, which is the largest recipient of charitable donations in the United States, larger than some of those familiar phrases like United Way and American Red Cross and Salvation Army. And the reason is Fidelity Charitable is a nonprofit organization aligned with the private sector corporation Fidelity for the sole purpose of holding donor-advised funds on behalf of their customers. And to help us make sense of all this is Elaine Martin. Elaine, great to have you with us on the Fundraising School's podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Bill. I'm so excited to be here.
Okay, so help us demystify this. What is a donor-advised fund?
So Fidelity Charitable and our donor advised fund function very similar to a charitable investment account. And what it does is we allow donors to recommend grants now or over time. And DAFs, we believe, have a multiplier effect. We think about it from a model of a give, grow grant. And so you can contribute appreciated securities, complex assets, or other types of funds into the donor advised fund. You get a tax deduction at that point. And then you have time to be able to think about how do you want to invest? How do you want to grow those assets to be able to grant to your favorite charities over a period of time? And so this is a tool that we've had been growing over the last 30 years. And it's been a really exciting opportunity for the sector to see, charitable giving grow in a really tax advantageous way that also is super easy and simple.
And we know that donor-advised funds are held by community foundations. Actually, any 501c3 can be a host of donor-advised funds. Indiana University hosts donor-advised funds. But by far, the largest amount of dollars with donor-advised funds are in the private wealth sector, led by Fidelity. And Elaine, why does a donor do this? Why does a donor not just send that gift to a qualified 501c3? Why do they first put the money in the donor-advised fund?
So I think there's a variety of reasons. Oftentimes, the people who are setting up their donor advised funds are individuals and families who are often first-time wealth earners. And sometimes they're established entrepreneurs. They come from a wide variety of backgrounds, and they have a strong desire to give back. So that's one of the things that I think ties them together. Many of our donors are giving 10 to 15 grants a year, and a lot of them start off giving to somewhere where they have a religious affiliation, a faith-based organization. There's a lot of giving around education, everywhere from early childhood interventions all the way through graduate education. And then, of course, where there's a grateful patient relationship, and whether it's research or care. And so those are often the beginning points of where people are using their donor advised funds. And a lot of times we see that a trend is that there's a preference for proactive giving rather than reactive giving. So we know that many of our donors have a special ready reserve that they use their donor advised funds to respond to natural disasters. But we also know that they're using it to think about how do they give in a thoughtful and strategic way to really strengthen the nonprofits in their own backyard or nationally or globally that they have a personal affiliation with.
So, Elaine, what it sounds like is these are some of our most strategic donors, that they're putting that money into the donor advised fund to give it a think, to let it be there for a while, to invest it and let the dollars grow. To look for that right opportunity to make the bigger gift. Maybe they've had a liquidity moment. Do you see that with your clients and with your customers, that they're really wanting to be strategic about their charitable giving, and that's why they're using a DAF?
I think strategy and effectiveness is absolutely core, but simplicity and administrative ease is equally important. And so what we know is that many of our donors are giving annually to the causes that they have already a relationship with. And then they're using the time that they have to also think about how do they want to really live out a lasting legacy and pass down either values or shared appreciation for a cause area where they believe they can make an impact. And so I think this piece around values and impact often work hand in hand. We know our donors are looking to see measurable impacts of their donations, and they're looking to ensure accountability and transparency. And many of our donors, really what roots them in their giving is very similar to the way that they engage with other nonprofits. They want to give back positively to society. And so that impact and that desire to give back, I think, work really hand in hand. And I think our donors, when they think about what strategy looks like, it's not just about how to think strategically about the nonprofits that they're partnering with, but it's also about how do they want to bring their families into the conversation, and what do they want their professional identities and their personal identities, where do they want to bring those together? So we see that with experimentation around things like impact investing as well.
Elaine, who is the typical person? And I know you have a wide variety of clients and customers at Fidelity, but can you summarize, what are some of the characteristics of these folks who are opening up donor advised funds? Are they our wealthiest neighbors, the highest of the net worth in our population? Are the participants more broad-based? And as you think about that, if you could also expand, you mentioned the simplicity of this. Back in the day, people might just open a family foundation, which is a nonprofit, which means I have to incorporate and go through all of those steps. So who is opening these types of donor advised funds, and why would they do so instead of just creating a family foundation?
I don't know if there's a typical donor advised fund donor. What I would say is many of our donors who are giving through their donor advised fund are also using other vehicles. So they're giving through checkbook giving, they're giving online, they're giving through their foundation, and they also have a donor advised fund that they're using in partnership. And so we have donors in every state. And the dollar entry point to open a donor advised fund at Fidelity Charitable is actually $0. So the average grant that you can make, the starting grant you can make is $50 at a time. So ideally, you'd want to put at least $50 in to start. But you can go all the way up and over hundreds of millions of dollars. So we have a wide variety of donors, but our average donor is granting about $4,000 at a time is their average grant size, and the average account size is about $17,000. So it's really representative, I think, of our goal of democratizing philanthropy, which is a big part of how we look at our work. And so I don't think that the donor advised fund donor is any different from the donor who's giving to charitable organizations throughout the country.
Elaine, I'm so glad that you explained that for us, because I do think, as we teach for the fundraising school, there might be this myth that it's only the very wealthiest who are opening donor advised funds. And certainly our high net worth donors are, but we've seen, Fidelity and others kind of lowering that threshold down to $0 to $50 just to get started, to make donor advised funds accessible to just everyday donors across income ranges. We see a big reason, a big result of that has been the explosive growth of donor advised funds. It took about 90 years to get to the first 1 million donor advised funds, and just 2 more years to get to the next million. So we see the fast growth of donor advised funds. How do I find these folks? How do I find out? How do I know who has a donor advised fund?
So when I was sitting at my desk at the Global Fund for Women, which is where I was prior to joining Fidelity Charitable, I was seeing checks coming across my desk from this organization, Fidelity Charitable. And often it was from people who'd already been giving to us through their foundation or through their online giving. And this now was another tool they had in their toolkit to be able to support a cause that they cared deeply about. And what I have noticed is that these donors are really cross every age. In theory, we can tell you that the average donor at Fidelity Charitable, when they open their account, is 55 years old, and now they're 64. However, we see every age, and you can open a donor advised fund and really start to experiment in what you might want to get deeper involved with. And so I would say our donors are, one way I would look is when you see a check or an electronic fund transfer coming in from Fidelity Charitable, take a look and see if the donor has shared their name and address with you, because most of the time they have. In fact, 96% of the time, our donors are giving with sharing their name and address with the nonprofits that they already love. And they're probably already engaged with you. They're probably going on your website. They're probably coming to your events. And so it's very rare that a nonprofit is learning about us, learning about a nonprofit through Fidelity Charitable. They're learning about it through their engagement with those organizations and the cause areas that matter most to them. So I think that's one piece. I would also say many of our impact investments that we're seeing are often led by a female member of the family, which is a trend that we did not expect. And a lot of our donors are starting to see the donor advised fund as a place where they can both have a social impact as well as an investment growth opportunity. And so that's the impact investing space really is a natural fit with the donor advised fund.
And to, again, amplify Elaine's wisdom, we get this all the time at the Fundraising School. When folks hear that the money coming out of a donor advised fund to a nonprofit is called a grant, fundraisers go, oh, I know how to find foundations. I go on the Foundation Resource Center or some other source, and I can find that foundation that might be a fit for me. No, that doesn't work that way with donor advised funds. And to just follow up on Elaine's advice, be talking to your donors, right? It's just part of that relationship building, cultivation, solicitation, stewardship with your donor that along the way you ask, hey, I understand that, people who are strategic donors tend to open up these donor advised funds. You strike me as that strategic donor. Do you have a donor advised fund? Is that something I should watch for? And also the data backing up Elaine's comment about what's happening at Fidelity, where only 4% of people holding donor advised funds are remaining anonymous. That is supported by our research at the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, as well as by the Donor Advised Fund Research Collaborative, shows that, again, the anonymity is just in the single digits. Now, Elaine, what do I do if this gift is anonymous? I just get this check from Fidelity. Where do I send the thank you note? How do I respond? How do I record this? What should a fundraiser do when they receive this wonderful gift?
Yeah, I think there's two parts. Before I go into the anonymous gift, I would just say most of our donors are giving where it's needed most. And I think that's also an opportunity for nonprofits to look at how do they want to engage with that donor in a more strategic way, because they're unlike a foundation. They're not saying this is necessarily for a specific project or initiative. They're saying, here's a way to give more broadly general core operating support. And in our case, we call it where it's needed most. When it comes to anonymous giving, you could always send a thank you note to us. I don't know if it's necessary. I think we know that the donors, for the most part, when they're giving anonymously, it's because they already have a relationship with that organization and they trust and believe in the work, or they have a public foundation that they're granting to around a variety of cause areas. And this might be something more personal to them that they want to give and have that relationship stay at the personal level. And so I would say for ways to engage with those anonymous donors, there's such a small percentage of the space that I don't know that it's really worth trying to chase down and try and figure out who that individual is, because it is just an individual, an average individual citizen from around the country. Our donors, I think the things that define them are often the acts of generosity and the model of humility that they are giving with. And that humble approach often means that they don't want a lot of recognition. They're not looking for their name on a building. They're not looking to have a dedicated program in their honor. They just want the work to continue as the organizations intend. And for the most part, they're already talking to you. They're engaging with you in the ways that you are wanting to share information, whether it's through your newsletters, through your websites, through your events, and your CEO correspondence.
Can a nonprofit receive a surprise gift from a donor advised fund? Of course, just like we can in our annual fund or through our major gift fundraising and planned gift fundraising. But as Elaine mentioned, the research backs up what the folks at Fidelity are seeing. Most often, this is a donor you know already and who knows you. I've also had fundraisers say when they receive that anonymous gift, from a DAF, maybe they can play Clue a little bit and try to figure that out and call and ask, hey, Bill, was that you? Who made that gift? And if not, here's what you do. Find out your favorite dessert, your favorite beverage, and go celebrate because you received this wonderful gift. It's all a good thing. Elaine, what about my relationship with Fidelity? Should I even have one? Should I be calling Elaine and saying, hey, here's what I do, and do you have any donor advised fund folks who might help me? Or, you mentioned the thank you letter to Fidelity, really not necessary. What relationship, if any, should I have with the hosts of the donor advised funds?
So what we have at Fidelity Charitable is we have a quarterly call that we do with nonprofits where we share an opportunity to hear about how to think about the donor advised fund, how to maybe reset your website if there isn't a very clear way to give with a DAF. And little tips and tools that we can offer to nonprofits. So that's something that we offer quarterly, and you can reach out to our organization. We're always happy to bring more organizations into their fold. But the way in which we add nonprofits to our database is through an overnight. Every night, the IRS feed. So if you're an IRS qualified charity, we know about you and you are available for our donors to be able to select you from their donor advised fund. Again, I'm not sure that investing the energy in Fidelity Charitable as the entity or another of our DAF peers in the sector is as beneficial as maybe working with a community foundation who has a dedicated fund, perhaps for the arts or for environmental work in your region, depending on what kind of organization you're focused on. I would say that's probably, there's more direct opportunity for engagement than with us. We're really trying to take the friction out of the relationship with the nonprofits and speed our work to our funds to you all. One thing I would recommend is we have an electronic funds transfer program. And that's something that a nonprofit can sign up with the donor advised fund, whether it's us or someone else, and actually have rather than getting a series of checks that might take weeks, all of the funds would then go to the organization every 24 hours. So it's an overnight feed. You get a full complimentary Excel spreadsheet, or I think a database that comes with the name of the donor, what they're giving to, if there's a cause area or specific initiative that they're focused on, or if they want to give an honor of someone. All of that information comes in that spreadsheet, and it helps I think get the funds to the organizations in the fastest way possible. And it doesn't mean that, someone has to come to the office and process a check and all that, we've seen a lot of mail fraud in the last few years since COVID, and we're trying to make it as easy and accessible for nonprofits to get those funds from us as possible.
Elaine, we've talked about so many of the positives of donor advised funds, and I want to provide you with an opportunity to, maybe respond to the, kind of primary criticism that some of our well-intended neighbors might have, either in the nonprofit sector or in the public sector, as well as the U.S. Congress looks at perhaps putting additional regulations on donor advised funds. And there is this concern among some that DAFs just become a parking lot, that since I, as a donor, receive any tax considerations immediately, I have no incentive to send those dollars out later to a qualified 501c3. Now, what we do know, again, the research show that donor advised funds send out about 18% of their funds every single year. Well, private foundations are required to send out 5%. So donor advised funds are already ahead of that. And donor advised funds have about 1/5 of the money that private foundations have, but send out about half as much as private foundations do every year. So they're sending out a much higher proportion of dollars. Now, that's not to defend the folks who are using the DAFs only as a tax shelter, as a parking lot. So again, I want to make sure our audience has the entire context here. But how do you respond when people say, Bill just put his money in there to get the tax write-off. He's not sending it out to the 501c3. And I'm concerned about that, Elaine. How would you respond?
So my instinct is most of our donors, if not all, are giving with extraordinary generosity. And once you give to the donor advised fund, it's an irrevocable gift. So you have to give that money away to charity. And on average, our donors are giving 23% of the assets under management into the sector annually. So that is a really big number and significantly more than I think people would realize. And we know that our donors are using the DAF because they want to optimize the financial impact of their donations. If you have had some kind of a big event where you could contribute into a donor advised fund, and you're ready to start making a strategy of what you want to give to, most of the time donors are not ready to give to one single organization. They want to be able to partner and deepen their relationship with these organizations and support multiple organizations. We encourage our donors to take what we call a portfolio approach. So you're not just giving to a single organization, but you're giving to a cause area where you can touch multiple parts of the response. I would also say that we know that centralizing giving into one place through the donor advised fund enables people to prioritize philanthropy, and it's really simplified the process. And then while there is this opportunity to make a commitment to philanthropy in the future, one of the things I would note is most of our donors are contributing into their account annually and granting annually. So there's a regular cadence of engagement with the donor advised fund where they're not just putting the money in and then and not actioning it. Oftentimes it's that they may have said, I want to put some of this funding aside to be able to use towards my retirement grant making and be a philanthropist post my working years, and that's part of their strategy. Another part would be I want to engage my family. I want to be in a relationship with my kids and my spouse, and I want to be able to think about how do we do that in a thoughtful way that's not just my vision, but actually our whole family's vision. And so that's another place where donors are using the DAF in a way that might not be a one-off instant, a reactive grant and strategy. And I think this idea of having a proactive, thoughtful, strategic granting strategy is one of the other reasons that that we don't see an instant giving out of the funds that come in. And then I'd also think the long-term gifts. Nonprofits have talked to us about the fact that they're hoping for more unrestricted funding. They're hoping for more multi-year funding. And this is a way that individuals can support these nonprofits that they care deeply about with multiple years of funding rather than just a single one-off grant. So those are just some of the things that that come to mind. But honestly, when I see our donors, I really see them excited about being part of this philanthropic sector. And the donor advised fund is a tool and a vehicle for them, but it is not driving their direction or their strategy. And if in many cases, if this is the first time they're engaging in philanthropy, it can be a lot to try and figure out what's the right organization and what's the right amount to support with. And I think that's what we want to give them the time and the space to be able to do. It's only going to strengthen our sector. We've seen that 74% of giving is by individuals. I think that's the Indiana's research. And the fact is, most of those donors are giving in some way through a donor advised fund, whether it's through a national donor advised fund or a community foundation or one of the religious organizations that are donor advised fund focused.
One of, if not the fastest areas of growth in charitable giving in the United States, the Donor Advised Fund. And Elaine Martin is Senior Vice President at Fidelity Charitable. And we're grateful to you, Elaine. Thank you for demystifying DAFs for us here on the Fundraising Schools podcast.
Such a delight to be with you. Thanks so much.
And we cover donor advised funds in several of our courses, including our Principles and Techniques of Fundraising course, our signature course, which also leads to the Certificate in Fundraising Management. We talk about DAFs and we talk about our Major Gifts course, our Planned Giving course, all throughout our curriculum, 24 courses in all, now leading to 5 different certificates. We teach in person in 10 U.S. cities and online, either asynchronous, which means recorded, or virtual in a live format in the United States and anywhere across the world. Now, we can customize our training, our curriculum, just for you, bringing one of those courses just to your nonprofit, or a piece of this course and a piece of that course. We tailor the curriculum just for your needs, so our custom training. We have our quarterly webinars, we have this weekly podcast, and of course, our textbook, Achieving Excellence in Fundraising, now out in the book's 5th edition. Information about the Fundraising School line at go.iu.edu/TFRS for the Fundraising School. Our podcast today has been produced by the Emmy Award winner, Mike Anthony, as well as by my colleague, Jennifer Boffman, CFRM. I'm Bill Stanczykiewicz, and now you are now more fully informed on this first day from the Fundraising School.